Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews, and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture Podcast. This one, again, is going to be on the water today. We've had some really heavy rain, and I've made the journey over the border into Cornwall, and I'm at Colliford Lake today. If you know Colliford Lake, or if you head to Cornwall, you may well have seen the signs for it, and it's just off the A30, and it is 930 acres. It's quite a big expanse of water. There are no boats on the water. So the technique or tactic for fishing here really is to cover water, use your watercraft, think about where the wind's blowing, food in whatever direction it may be, and cover plenty. And it's a fabulous location. It's really pretty. Like I say, if you're heading down to Cornwall, it's a really easy place to go visit, simply because it's 5 minutes from the A30. So it's a great location from that point of view. If you live locally, I'm sure you know about it. I've spent many happy years fishing here, and I haven't fished here for a fair time, I have to say. It's been quite a long time now, and so I'm really looking forward to it today. I'm joined today by my good friend Duncan Raynor, who's been a guest on the podcast, and he's an expert here and knows the water really well, and he's developed some patterns for fishing the water here as well. And we thought it would be fun to kick off the session with him tying a fly for us as well. That it would be kind of cool if we could catch fish on it too. So that's going to be great fun. But Dunk, it's great to meet up with you. Great to be back at Colliford Lake again. How you doing, bud?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Pete. Nice to see you again. We're playing with fire here because it looks like there's about to be another heavy rain shower coming our way, but we'll see how we go.
And to put that into context, he's got his fly tying equipment out. He's a fabulous fly tyer, and he's got on the back of his truck, he's got a vise set up. He's going to tie a pattern. What are you going to tie for us?
It's a fly we call the Collihog, which a buddy of mine, Keith, named for us. We were trying to tie hedgehogs and got tired of tying in all the different bunches of deer here, so we just sort of abbreviated it and stuck a big bunch of deer on the front of it, and it seems to work just fine.
I think the last time I fished here was with you, and it's a few years ago now, and I remember writing a piece about it in Eat Sleep Fish, and I know you'd come hot foot from your local river as well, and you'd discovered a technique on fishing streamers on your home water as well. So I remember you turning up in a high state of excitement, having made everything click there and catch some fish. And I'm trying to figure out how many years ago that was now. It must be 6-7 years, I guess.
It feels like that, yeah. I can remember it exactly. I was fishing a massive sort of lead-headed streamer on a 4-weight Orvis rod. That rod came to grief with that very same lead-headed streamer, actually. I can't remember how long ago. It feels like a while. We're parked almost in exactly the same spot, weirdly, so creatures of habit, obviously.
Absolutely, and the sun's come out. As I said, this is being recorded mid-May. The roads is the first day that we're allowed to sort of hug friends, and Duncan and I managed to have a hug as well, so it's the first hug I've made since we've had lockdown. The rain on the way down has been horrific. It's been really heavy. My home river, like I said at the beginning, is going to be a washout for a little bit, and this is a place I used to head to when I couldn't fish rivers, so it's really nice to be back. Like we say, we're going to hear a little bit about Duncan's pattern. I'm a complete heathen when it comes to this, and I love pulling a tadpole on an intermediate line. So I bet I catch nothing, and Duncan pulls them out on his Collihog as well. So without further ado, he's going to tie up his fly now. The hook's in the vise, and it's a really fascinating pattern. What size hook are you using, bud?
It's a size 12, this one, and it's a B175, which is a Camisat hook. It's nice and strong. Sort of standard wet fly hook. Seems to work really well.
Fantastic. And he's just putting the thread on now, and all the materials. I think that's a really good tip if you're a fly tie, have all the materials to hand. And that's quite a high risk thing, given that it's a bit windy, it's a bit wet, and everything else that goes with it. But so far the sun's starting to shine a little bit now, so that's helping the cools, and the fly's underway. So what are you putting on first, bud?
So what I've done is I've run the black. I've got black thread. Run it down the hook shank just to sort of where the barb is, and I think this is called glister, and I like a sort of a coppery kind of a glister. I've got a little pinch of that, so I'm just going to roll that on the thread. It's quite easy because it's a synthetic. It dubs quite well. So I've got a pinch, maybe 3/4 of an inch long kind of thing. I'm going to tighten that up, rolling the same way on the thread. Just keep it going round. So I've got a nice little sort of a ball, maybe, I don't know, 3 mil sort of something, so that sort of size. I've finished that now. I'm then going to put a pinch of black seal's fur. Probably a little bit bigger of a bunch here. So I'm going to fill probably the next 2/4 of the hook shank, if that makes sense. So I've got a 1/4 little bunch of that glister, and then this black seal's fur. I don't know if it's the right thing. Some people use wax. I use a bit of spit. So I flick my finger in the spit, and then I tighten up the dubbing. Then I'm going to roll that round the shank. And again, well, it's one of those flies, sort of the rougher the better in some ways. So that's that kind of done.
Right, so we've got the body in shape now. What's happening next? Look like you've got some deer hair?
Deer hair here. Sorry, that's why I got confused. It's a deer belly hair, and this is dyed black. If you can get your hands on the deer hair you buy, do it. You want quite a coarse one for this pattern. Seems to work better. Going back to that sort of rougher kind of a look. I've got a little pinch in my fingers here, so I've cut it off the hide. A little pinch, and what I'm doing is I'm holding it in my left hand, and with my right hand I'm just pulling the underfur out. I stack it. You probably don't need to, but I stack it, so you just hear the tapping of that. I'm just got a little comb. I'm just flicking out any more of the underfur. If there's any underfur in deer hair, it doesn't stack very well, so you can hear it. I'm tapping the deer hair, just stacking it up so it's nice and neat. And always when you stack it, pull it so that the points of the deer hair are pointing the way you want to tie them. Otherwise you end up turning around in your hand and it all falls out generally. So I've got that pinch in my left hand now. Just replace the stacker. Then I put it on the shank of the hook, and I want it just over the back of the hook, maybe 3-4 mil over the back of the hook. Pinch it in my left hand, and then over tightly with the thread, and I just tighten it up gently, sort of 3 wraps with it pinched, and then I kind of fold back the deer hair, sort of like you were doing a CDC and out kind of idea. Just fold it back and roll the thread through it a couple of times. This just helps lock it down more than anything. Couple of wraps around the head, and then I use a whip finishing tool. I use CNF tools. I think they're the best. Not cheap, but they're worth it. So then I do a whip finish, 1, 2, 3, 4. Slide that up, tighten it up. Scissors underneath, just slide them up the thread, nip it off, and then here again just pull sort of the butts of the deer hair, it would be, pull that forward, and then sort of at a 45-degree angle, probably a couple of mil off the hook eye, just snip them off, and then I just pull off the rough ones, and that there is a Collihog.
That was just a matter of minutes, and like Duncan says, it's a straightforward pattern, quick pattern to tie that has caught him a lot of fish here as well. So I'll put some pictures of that up, and we're going to try and see if we can catch a fish on that today as well, which is going to be really exciting. One of the things for me is where he said, it doesn't have to be perfect, and I'm kind of a subscriber to that I kind of like scruffy impressionistic flies, and looking at the fly that he's just tied, it definitely is that. So I reckon the plan that was perfect timing, because the rain's just starting to come in now, so he's just starting to pack his stuff up. In the background you can probably hear. So what we're going to do next, I think, is get into our kit, string up some rods. As I said, I'm going the slightly more aggressive route, and the reason I do it's not because I just love the take of the fish when I'm pulling something. And I have to say as well that Colliford is a brown trout only fishery, mainly wild fish. I think there is some supplementary stocking as well, isn't there?
Yes, yeah, they stock every year. I think they put in 1,000 sort of 6 to 8 inch little brownies.
Yeah, which isn't a lot given we've got 930 acres to play with as well. So, we're going to cover as much as we possibly can and see if we can find some fish. So we're just setting up now, and Duncan's rigging his rod up. What are you fishing with, bud?
I've got a 10-foot rod today. It's rated for a 6-weight line. I'm going to use a floating line to start with. If I'm struggling, then I might go onto a hover, or even maybe an intermediate. Depends on kind of the wind strength, really, more than anything. The idea here, I always try and imagine it like I'm lock fishing from a boat. So it's a cast and a step and a cast and a step and a cast and a step and a cast and a step. So we're trying to cover as much ground/water as we can. I wear chest waders more for the fact that it keeps the sort of weather off you than the fact we're going to be wading particularly deep. Being sort of an upland reservoir, it's not a loch, being an upland kind of a reservoir, we're looking for falls of insects rather than hatches of insects. This is based on granite mainly, so the water is slightly acidic. You get hatches of chironomids, so you get your little black buzzers. But this time of the year, sort of mid-May, we're kind of thinking sort of St. John's fly, hawthorns being blown on, black gnats being blown on, all that sort of stuff. So we're thinking about more falls of insects rather than hatches of insects up here.
Great tips, and I'm pleased you said that, Duncan, as an expert here as well. In the introduction, I said cover as much water as you possibly can. We don't have the luxury of a boat, so we've just got to keep covering the water. Like I said, I'm going for a slightly different approach, and sometimes when you're fishing with a friend, it's a really good idea to do it, to have different setups as well. So I'm fishing a 9-foot 6-weight rod, and I've got I think it's an intermediate line, and a smallish sort of black tadpole type pattern, and I'm going to throw that out and pull it back. And as I said, just some of these browns sometimes, if memory serves me correctly, take so aggressively. So it's great fun way to fish, and yeah, I really enjoy doing it. So what we're going to do is just rig up now and have a wander down to the water and see how we get on. So we just had the mother load of rain. It's been absolutely teeming down, and looking out, it looks like that's going to be the pattern, that we're going to get showers as we fish. When we're fishing, we've got the wind coming in our left side and it's blowing towards the far bank. We're fishing in a bay, good size. It's probably, I don't know, 7-8 acres long, something along those sort of lines. Pretty big. One of the things here that brown trout do come in pretty close, so you don't need to wade out really, really deep. We're sort of shin to knee deep at the worst of it. And Duncan's already, I heard a curse come up, and he's already had a fish come have a look at his fly. One of the things I've noticed, just being sort of knee deep, is how cold the water is. And it's kind of interesting for me thinking about how I'm fishing, that I'm sort of letting the fly land and then just pulling it back relatively quickly. And I wonder, with this temperature, I should let the fly go down a little bit deeper and then perhaps retrieve a little bit more slowly. But we'll wait and see what happens. So what do you know? We've had Dunk's had a fish have a look at his fly, and now he's actually got one on now, which is great news to see. Pretty brown trout. And that's on the pattern he's tied as well, which is fantastic news. I'm really thrilled about that. Nice fishing, bud. Nice fishing.
There he is.
So, stunning fish. Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
He's quite silvery, that one.
He is, isn't he?
Yeah, often they get sort of darker coloured, I think because of the bottom.
Yes.
But yeah, I wouldn't have, he'd maybe been in a year or so, grown on a bit. Quite a tough life for them up here, I think. I'm just going to slip him back, I think.
Nicely done, bud. Nicely done.
There he goes.
So that is the equivalent of our first drift, really. Obviously, we're actually doing it on foot, but we've worked the bay. Duncan's had some success, a fish coming to the fly and then hooking and landing a fish, which has been wonderful news. I sort of followed him along the bank there. I felt like a touch from a fish, but that's been it. I still think perhaps I'm moving the fly in these conditions perhaps a little bit too quickly, but part of it's to keep me warm as well. It's pretty cold, isn't it, bud?
It is, yeah. It doesn't feel like when it should be in this time of year, but there we go. It's one of those springs, isn't it?
Yep, and that fish was really well fished for. And I'm looking at your setup. Which one was it you called it on?
It was on the top dropper, so I fish a team of 3 flies, sort of like you would if you were traditional loch style fishing. I fish a Collihog on the point, not point, sorry, on the top fly. Then in the middle I change. It depends I sometimes use a little peacock and black. The one I've got on now is a sort of a cocky bundu variant, and then a little tadpole, or sometimes a little flashy one like an Invicta, something traditional like that on the point, or a bibio or something like that that imitates little fry as well. That's kind of the basic setup, and just chop and change.
That's one of the nice things about here, and I found myself in the past doing that, fishing those sort of traditional wet flies is really good fun, isn't it? And works.
Yeah, it does work. Those flies are, they've worked for generations and generations of us. And they seem to work here. It depends on the conditions. It's it feels like sort of a late March day when it's mid-May. I have seen a couple of little buzzers hatching, so hopefully as the day warms up, we'll get some more action.
Fantastic. So what's the plan next?
I think what we'll do, where we've parked, we sort of parked halfway down this bay. The wind's kind of shifted on us a bit, which it often does up here. It sort of bounces around being so high. So what I think we'll do is we'll go up past the cars, and there's a bit more wind sort of hitting the top of this bay, the top sort of corner. So I think we'll go up there and just have a quick blast down that through to where the cars are.
Brilliant. Let's go. So the really nice thing with fishing with someone who knows the water well and's an expert here is that they're catching fish. And Dunk's just put back his second fish. A really pretty fish. What would you say, a pound?
Maybe that. He's a bit skinny. I think it's been a bit of a tough winter for them up here.
But beautifully done again. How did that one play out? Which fly did that one take? And you put us into another bay, a little bit deeper here as well. Was there some thinking behind that too, I guess?
Just being a bit more depth, we could fish our flies slightly slower. And with a bit more depth, maybe that the fish would feel confident coming into the shallow water, which is probably warming up quicker. There's also a fair amount of granite and rock here, so any sun that has hit them will have warmed up the water here a bit more, stirred up the insect life, hopefully a bit more, more fish moving.
Good thinking and great fishing, bud.
Thank you, bud. No worries.
It's funny, I was just thinking about last time I'd done some stillwater fishing, and then it made me think, in the UK, I can't even remember the last time. It was probably the last time I was here, which was at least 7 or 8 years ago, probably longer than that if I think about it. But what it suddenly reminded me of, it's cold. I'm really fortunate. One of my good friends, Ray, lives in Denmark, and I sea trout fish with him, and we fish in the sea, but we also fish in the fjords. And this reminds me of fishing Eastern Fjord with him, which I do once or twice a year. And it was kind of the first time I did it that it suddenly reminded me of this place, Colliford. And I said to him, well, I'm going to fish this exactly how I'd fish Colliford, which I'm doing now, which isn't actually working. But this is how I tend to fish for the sea trout as well. And we were talking about conditions, Duncan, 9. It suddenly dawned on me that usually when I'm doing that for the sea trout, that it's a lot colder, the water temperature's a lot colder. So it's made me stick, and I'm an obstinate fellow, that I'll stick with this to see if I can make it work. But it'll be really interesting. But it was funny looking at the lake here now, and the size of it did remind me of one of those fjords over in Denmark. So we've had some lunch, we've had a cup of tea to warm up a little bit as well. It was nice bumping into another angler as well. It's such a big place that it kind of swallows people up as well. So it was nice to have a chat with the guy. He'd sort of just got there, said the weather was probably getting a little bit better, a little bit warmer this afternoon. He said it's been sort of kind of fairly mixed. He fishes here regularly, and it had been a little bit mixed. And as Duncan has mentioned, it feels a bit more March than May at the moment. But it's interesting walking along here. We were just chatting away, and there's a few carp in here, and we'd just seen Duncan had just spotted the tail of one. We're just sort of working our way round. It'll be interesting to see if we can see the tail of it, but it looks as though it's bugged out of here for the time being. But our plan is we're just sort of by the dam wall here, and we're going to fish out from a point and fish our way back again. We did have a spell where the weather got a little bit better as well, and Duncan spotted a couple of fish rising as well. Got one to come and have a look at the fly, but didn't fully commit. And I think that's a pretty apt description of how the fishing has been. But it's been so much fun, and it's something I've not done for so long that I'm really, really enjoying myself at the moment. So I think that's the plan, isn't it, Dunk?
Yeah, let's head up to this point. The wind's sort of whipping around the corner here, and we'll fish our way back, kind of back to where we parked.
Fantastic. It's said the wind is shifting round a little bit at the moment as well, isn't it?
Yeah, often it does up here. And you can sort of, you pick your battles almost. I like the wind over my left shoulder. I'm a right-handed caster, so make it easy for myself. Also remembering that lots of the food is blown onto this water. So if you've got the wind behind you or off a shoulder, it's often blowing food onto the water.
Makes perfect sense. Let's see how we get on. So what Duncan did was take us up to they're almost sort of mini promontories, and the wind's been blowing down on our left side. And as that water has a little bit of a chop in it, we've been working the water there. It's been a fascinating and really, really fun session. It's been a masterclass in fishing Colliford from Duncan. We stuck with the same methods, really, that he had a team of 3 traditional wet flies, floating line, and I've stuck with the intermediate and worked a black tadpole, really, for most of the time. And it's been interesting that there's been virtually zero interest in that. I put on a cormorant for a very short time, thinned my leader, just played with things a little bit. And lo and behold, I had a fish on, which was cool. But I've been desperate. It's always been a method that's worked really well for me. And we've been, as you do when you're fishing with a friend, you sort of kind of think, right, well, did this... should I have done this? Could I have done this? But we decided to stick with it just to see what would happen. And it hasn't worked for me today. But like I say, it's been a masterclass from Duncan. And you've been pulling them out really nicely. It's been a fascinating session, though, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been good fun. It's a hard place to fish sometimes. It doesn't always go to plan. And today we've caught a lot more fish than some of the days I've been here, put it that way.
But I think you've caught most of them actually as well, which has been great. But that's been the interesting thing about the setup and flexibility. And like I say, fishing with a friend, I stuck with one method because I wanted to see, or we wanted to see if it would work, and it hasn't today. It's got really cool now. The temperature seems or feels as though it's dropped a little bit more. You were sort of, where were you catching the fish on your 3 flies? Were you catching them in particular places, or was it mixed up? I.e., was it point fly? Was it dropper? How was that working out? Did you think about that too, or realise numbers, etc.?
I think on those, I think I've had 4 more this afternoon after lunch. 2 are on the top fly. And 1 each on the middle and point fly. I'd say on average, and this is all lock fishing that I've ever done, is more fish you catch on your top fly. I don't know why. Presumably it's closer to the surface of the water, so as you're stripping it through and lifting it on the dibble almost, it looks like something emerging and they just can't resist it. I'd love to know that I'm sure there's someone out there who's done the science, but I've never really fathomed the depth of it. But it's always interesting that you seem to catch more on your top fly. And I almost invariably have a Collihog tied on.
Well, you've shown us the pattern. You've tied the pattern. You've caught fish on the pattern. So that's kind of interesting to see. We're just seeing, it may have been a carp just sort of moving away from us actually while we've been talking. So we're just pointing rods at the same time at the same place. So that's been interesting. Do you think the speed has been, I've stuck with that sort of moving the fly through the water with the cooler temperatures? Do you think that may be something to do with it, but moving that fly a little bit more slowly has paid dividends for you?
If I could feel my fingers, I would probably be figure of eighting a bit more, sort of a steadier retrieve. But I've certainly found that a sort of a longer, slower strip has worked better today. Possibly temperature related, possibly air temperature related, in that they're not willing to come up. There's not a lot on the water. We've seen the odd little midge and the odd hawthorn around, but it's been quite cold. And I'm feeling the water on our legs. I think it's colder than we realise, and that probably the fish aren't quite as active as we thought. So in sort of summary, I suppose, moving it slower has worked better today.
Excellent, because it's interesting, isn't it? And again, we analyse these things if a technique has worked, but also if it hasn't, and we try and learn from it. Do you think, because part of me thinks, well, there's not a lot going on. There's fish are moving through the lake the whole time. And by moving something, you might bring something into play, but it hasn't worked that way, has it? So, we sort of analyse and hypothesise about all these sorts of things. Of course, like Duncan said, we don't know. But it's been a fascinating way to fish side by side and watch how things have unfolded. So we've kind of learned something from that. And I guess that's what I'm getting round to, isn't it? That having that team working it a little bit slower has definitely, without a shadow of a doubt, been the way to do it, isn't it?
It would appear so. The fish often tell you, don't they? I certainly think pulling a lure at this time of year can be really, really effective. If you've got the fish that have been perhaps not as active and the water's warming up, I think if you're going to catch a good fish, and we've been in some areas today with a bit of depth where you might find a good fish, I think that would probably catch them. I think I have found the more active fish today by moving a team of 3 sort of in the surface layers, as it would be.
And it's been great to see, and great fishing, mate. It's been always a pleasure to fish with you. And I if somebody's heading down the A30 and they need a breather or want to fish somewhere different, it's just such a great venue to come fish, isn't it?
Oh, it's fantastic. It rewards those with strong legs. So if you can cover the ground, so remember to cover ground. And if it's not working in a particular area, move. It's worth moving. Often, you move and you find some fish feeding. So that would be my one bit of lasting advice: is move, and cast and move, like any sort of upland or high altitude kind of fishing. Cover the ground.
And the nice thing about here as well is that there's a number of car parks. So like Duncan said, if you feel you fished a bay or fished out an area, you can just jump in the car, move around, go park somewhere else. And we've been in a couple of car parks today and wandered around and had a look at those. But for me today has been such great fun. It's taken me out of my comfort zone. It's something that I don't do as often as I could or possibly should. It's hard to get me away from moving water, I have to admit, but I've just loved today. And we're just looking out over a portion of the lake right now towards the dam wall, and it's beautiful in a rugged way, and it's just such a fascinating venue to fish. And like Duncan says, you get rewarded. You have to work to be rewarded. It's brown trout only, so we know they're a little bit moody than their cousins, the rainbows, but if you do get it right, and Duncan's certainly done that today, it's been really wonderful to watch and see. And it is a fabulous fishery. Great value as well, and easy to get to as well. So I'm going to be back soon. I've got unfinished business here now. And so I'm going to be back soon. I know you've been fishing here many, many years, and you just love to come back and be here, don't you?
Oh, it's a special place for me. Many happy hours spent, putting the world to right in your head. And it's one of those sort of places, the wind blows and the waves kind of, whip up on the lake. It's wild enough, but easy enough to get to. So it's a combination of both. I've had lots of really good times here.
And the really cool thing, like Duncan was saying about his fly setup as well, that, it's kind of cool, a nod to tradition, fishing. We were talking about it while we were fishing about, we wondered how many people have caught a fish on a black Pennell. And I think Duncan's probably caught more than one on that today as well, which has been really cool. So there's that lovely nod to tradition. It is here, and certainly Rodeford as well, is sort of kind of like our equivalent almost to locks, really, aren't they?
Yeah, certainly for us down in the southwest. If there are boats on this, it would be great fun. There's boats on Redford, so you can fish the sort of traditional style. And it's a different way of fishing. It's not necessarily belting out long lines. You're in close contact with your flies, and you can see what's happening because the flies are slightly closer to you. Certainly with floating lines, your flies are up in the surface layer, so with a good pair of Polaroids on, you can often see the fish come up behind it and slash at the fly. It's always exciting watching what the fish, how they respond to your flies.
Mate, it's been fantastic as always fishing with you today. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I say, I've got unfinished business here, so if you're heading back soon, please let me know. Keep me in touch. But thanks so much for showing me how to fish Colliford.
No worries. Anytime, Pete.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to this one. And this is another one of our On the Water section of podcasts. From the feedback I've had from people, you seem to be enjoying those, and as ever I try and make content varied and hopefully interesting for you to listen to as well. So let me know if you've enjoyed this one, or if you haven't even, but there's plenty more planned. So thanks so much for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.